This review. I'm joined this morning by Mail Online reporter Lettice Bromovsky and journalist and political commentator Jade Azim. So welcome back to both of you. And we talked at length in the last hour about the extraordinary interview in the Sunday Times, which we'll come on to in a moment, with the parents of two of the victims of the Southport stabbings. It's also on the front of the Sunday Mirror, and you wanted to pick up on that, Lettice, to kick us off.
Exactly. I think it just highlights the importance of this story and how important it is that these girls who've died aren't just viewed as the victims of a sort of mass murderer, but they're also humanised. And that, I think, is what their parents are trying to do right now, is change the narrative behind them, show them as these little girls who had all their lives ahead of them, how they loved doing these different sort of things and reading books and learning more and just being with their parents, being with their friends and going outside. And it's really a side of the girls that we haven't necessarily seen up to this point, because as the press ourselves, definitely, but also as the public, we get swept up in the trial and the killer and what motivated him to do such a horrific, heinous act, that now that that's over and Axel's been sentenced to 52 years, we can now take a moment to step back, look at these girls for the light that they brought to the world for no matter how short amount of time it was.
And also because it is such an important interview and an important message that they have, the fact that the Sunday Mirror has put it on their front page, even though it's another paper's interview, is quite interesting, isn't it? Yeah. And let's go to the interview that they've done with the Sunday Times then. They've picked out the headline, we're constantly looking for light in the darkness, and they do. As Lettice was saying, they paint an extraordinary picture of these beautiful young girls, but they also tell the harrowing story of them finding out the news that they had been killed.
Yeah, it's a heartwarming tribute to the little girls, actually. One of the quotes that sticks out to me is that Elsie's mother says that it was an honour to be her mum, and she talks about the sheer kindness that that little girl sort of brought to the world. So it's just got some really, really heartwarming sort of aspects of their human stories. But it also does talk about sort of how they came to find out, but also the pain that they went through with this really public case. And they talked about how they actually criticised the judge for going into too much injury detail. So it is that human element to it, but it's also about, you know, just the pain that the case caused.
Yeah, and you talk about how, you know, important to put the girls at front and centre of people's minds and not the killers. But I guess there are still questions to be asked. There is going to be a public inquiry into how he came to carry out the acts he did and without being stopped. So there's always going to be that discussion and that debate, isn't there?
Absolutely. And as you say, the parents have already been calling in these stories to say that there have been failings, and they welcome this public inquiry that the government's going to do to see, you know, what more could have been done and what can be done in the future to make sure this never, ever happens again.
Absolutely. Let's move on to The Observer now, Jade. We talked about their main story on the front page, but their second story is about gambling firms and use of data. So what exactly are they alleging here?
Yeah, so just beforehand, there's been no response yet from either company, but this is a fascinating, particularly shocking story, actually, about the idea that gambling firms have been trading data with Meta so that their users are getting blitzed with adverts for gambling casinos whenever they use Facebook. So there's clearly a lot to be said about a potential data breach here. And it's interesting that Ian Duncan-Smith, the Conservative chair of the APPG on gambling, has called for an immediate intervention. And actually, this is a cross-party thing where we've talked about gambling in the past, this has been a sort of cross-party appeal to put some action in, and this is probably going to sort of ignite that conversation again.
Well, yeah, and again, it reopens that debate about the use of our data and how aware we are of its value, and how there are some companies who just see it as the most important thing, because it tells us so much about prospective customers.
And it also shows how it can be misused. There's always going to be that fiery debate between, you know, your right to privacy and the data being used by companies when people give it to them and using that. But this particularly feels like a rather dark way to be using it. Gambling is a very addictive and dangerous thing that people can be getting into. And so to be using advertisements against people who are already using gambling and spending their money in that way feels like sort of, you know, giving drugs to an addictive person. It feels like a unfair way to be using that data.
Yeah, really interesting to see how that develops, that story. Lettice, you wanted to talk about the story on the Sunday Telegraph's front page about Donald Trump talking about Prince Harry.
Yes, so Donald Trump has come out and he said yesterday, you know, that he's not going to deport Prince Harry. And this comes, though, alongside a comment that he said about Meghan, saying he's got so many issues already because his wife is so terrible. I mean, it's classic Donald Trump to come out and say something so rude. But on the deporting Prince Harry side of it, it's quite interesting because this is a U-turn from Donald Trump. When the whole debate that's going on here is that Prince Harry was potentially going to be deported over lying on his immigration papers about doing drugs. We don't know whether he lied or not, I should say that, but in his book Spare, he later said that he'd done cocaine as a teenager and then experimented with some other drugs as well. And so the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative right-wing think tank, have been coming after him, saying that we have a right, a public right, to know whether he lied in that immigration paper, in which case, if he lied, he could then potentially be deported. When Biden did this, he said, nope, I'm not going to disclose what was on Harry's immigration paper. And Trump came after him. He said, that's outrageous. You're protecting him. You're protecting, you know, these lies and these people like this. Whether Trump has now seen the immigration papers, seen that maybe he didn't lie, we don't know. Maybe we'll never know. But he's now said he's not going to deport Prince Harry. Maybe it's just not worth the argument, but we don't know for now.
He's going to be breathing a sigh of relief. He's actually at the Invictus Games in Canada, I think, at the moment. So, I'm sure the news has reached him. Let's move on, shall we, to the Observer, Jade, because there's an article in here about what the Labour government might do about these giant oil fields where exploration was blocked by a Scottish court, and what the next steps might be.
Yeah, so this is actually a microcosm of a larger story about the sort of green versus growth, and there's sort of this internal tug of war within government about how do you reach maximum growth but also protect your net zero targets. And this is particularly acute in that, yes, so the Prime Minister's weighing up whether to allow this new oil field, this Rosebank North Sea oil field. But the Grantham Institute on Climate Change has come out and said, you know, this is going to absolutely destroy our targets. You know, it's going to be really, really difficult to live up to our net zero commitments in a turbulent world where Trump's also talking about reneging on net zero targets. You know, what does it mean for the future of net zero? And we know that behind the scenes, according to this story, Ed Miliband is considered as a critic of this. But it's this weighing up the green versus growth thing. The government's under a lot of pressure about growth. What do they do?
Well, yes, exactly. And in their manifesto, Labour said they wouldn't back any new exploration projects, but this was one that had been agreed under the Tories, but then got blocked by the courts. And it's whether or not they back this new application for it. But we've got the same issue with Heathrow as well, haven't we?
Yeah, well,
Heathrow expansion. You know, Ed Miliband was saying, he came in and did an interview with me on Friday, and he was saying that, you know, if it does fall within the green, you know, within the green rules, then obviously it's a good thing. But growth seems to be the priority.
Exactly, and I think that there's another sort of aspect to this as well, which is that we don't want to upset President Trump, and we know, like you were saying, he's very much going that green is not the way forward. You know, he's cancelled the wind farms, he's cancelled any further government grants to wind farms and things like that. And it's whether by us continuing to do green initiatives and things like that would somehow enrage him to then push for tariffs or things like this. We're continuously treading this very thin line with him. And this would be something, you know, that they'll probably be taking into consideration how he would react.
Let's move on. We've only got about a minute, but I wonder whether we want to talk about plastic surgery or about weight loss drugs. You choose.
Both of them seem high on the list. One of the plastic surgery stories that we've got here, which I can do really quickly, is that doctors are coming out saying that in order to get plastic surgery, we should be giving mental health checks to those people asking for them. And now, off the face of it, this seems like a very good thing to me. With social media nowadays, people constantly can only compare themselves to other people online. And actually, there's a phrase here called Helen of Troyism, which is what they're using, which is essentially that you can never be beautiful enough. You will never be perfect, continuously trying to change yourself because you're continuously trying to compare yourself. And I think it's just quite an interesting thing that doctors are saying mental health checks might be the way forward.
Does that make sense, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly on the other story, they're also talking about Wegovy, which is that weight loss drug, being prescribed to a very small number of troops to help with diabetes and weight loss. Again, alongside plastic surgery, the weight loss drug
Look of perfection, this idea.
It continues to be really, really salient and just continuously causing debate.
You managed to tie those together beautifully.
Right,
and we managed to do
right.
both.
What are we here
Your
for?
job is done. We're out of time. So good to have your company this morning. Thanks so much.
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Mandatory evacuation.